Hunter wanted to humiliate his ex-wife by inviting her to his lavish rooftop Christmas party. He thought she would arrive looking defeated and ashamed. But when Imani descended from a private helicopter with 3 identical toddlers clutching her designer gown, the entire party stopped breathing. The same woman he once called broken now had triplets, and that was just the beginning. Before we begin, welcome to our channel. Don't miss a single plot twist. Smash that like button. Subscribe now for more thrilling karma stories, and let's watch his world burn. Once upon a time, in the gleaming towers of Manhattan's financial district, there lived a man named Hunter Grayson. He was a powerful CEO in his early 30s. Everyone in the business world knew him as a man who loved control, status, and legacy. Hunter wore custom Italian suits, drove the latest luxury cars, and carried himself as if ordinary people existed only to admire him from below. He was calculating, ambitious, and obsessed with the image of success. But behind the corner office, behind the Rolex on his wrist, there was a part of his life that enraged him every single day. His wife, Imani, had given him no children. Imani was an elegant and graceful woman. She was stunning with rich brown skin and intelligent eyes that carried quiet strength even in moments of pain. She had married Hunter out of love, not for his wealth. And for 5 years she stood by his side. But those 5 years became years of torture, because every doctor's appointment ended the same way. Every pregnancy test came back negative, and every family gathering became an interrogation. No child. One winter evening, the storm that had been building in their marriage finally exploded. The penthouse was silent except for the hum of the city below, the air thick with unspoken resentment. Imani sat on the edge of their king-sized bed, her hands folded in her lap, trying to steady her breathing. Hunter entered the bedroom already loosening his tie, his jaw clenched, his voice dripping with contempt. 5 years, Imani, Hunter said coldly, tossing an envelope on the bed. 5 years of waiting and still no child. Do you expect me to build an empire with no one to inherit it? Imani looked down at the envelope, her voice barely above a whisper. Hunter, we've been trying. I've done everything the doctors said. Maybe we need a different specialist. Maybe there's still a chance. A chance? Hunter cut her off with a bitter laugh. Is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night? I'm done with chances. My mother calls me weekly asking when I'll finally give her a grandchild. My board members whisper about succession planning. Do you have any idea what it's like to be a CEO with no heir? You've made me look weak. Imani's eyes began to glisten. Don't talk like that. I'm your wife. We took vows. We said in sickness and in health, for better or worse. Why are you treating me like I'm disposable? Hunter's voice rose, sharp and merciless, because that's exactly what you are now. What good is a wife who can't provide the one thing that matters? You live in my penthouse, wear the clothes I buy you, drive the car I lease for you, yet you can't give me a single child to carry my name. Imani, you're dead weight. You're holding back my future. Imani's lips trembled as she tried to form words. Don't say that. I've prayed every night. I've cried myself to sleep. Do you think this makes me happy? Do you think I enjoy feeling incomplete? I'm suffering too, Hunter. Can't you see that? Hunter turned away, pacing the room like a caged predator. His frustration boiled over with every word. I don't care about your suffering. I care about results, and you've given me nothing but disappointment. Tomorrow morning, my attorney will contact you. This marriage is over. Imani gasped as if she'd been physically struck. Divorce?
You're going to divorce me after everything? After I supported you when you were building your company from nothing? After I gave up my career ambitions for you? Hunter, have you forgotten what we meant to each other?" Hunter spun around to face her, his expression ice cold. "Love doesn't build dynasties. My grandfather was right. I should have married someone proven. I need a wife who can give me sons, not a woman who turns my home into a mausoleum of failure. By tomorrow afternoon, Imani, I want you out of this apartment." Imani fell to her knees, reaching for his hand. "Please, Hunter, don't do this. Give us more time. Give me one more chance. Miracles can still happen." Hunter jerked his hand away as if her touch burned him. "There are no miracles here. You're the problem, and I'm done pretending otherwise. You're leaving. That's final." The argument echoed through the marble halls. The housekeeper in the kitchen pretended not to hear, but she caught every word. Imani's sobs filled the bedroom as she made her final plea. "Hunter, look at me. Look at the woman who stood beside you at every business dinner, who defended you to your critics, who believed in you when others doubted. I've given you everything I have. Don't discard me like I'm nothing." But Hunter's heart had turned to stone. He pulled out his phone and made a call right in front of her. "Richard, it's Hunter. Yes, I need you to draw up divorce papers immediately. Grounds, irreconcilable differences. Yes, she'll be served tomorrow. Make it quick and clean." Imani stared at him in disbelief. "You already called your lawyer? You planned this? Hunter, how could you be so cruel?" Hunter looked at her down without a trace of emotion. "Imani, you're an anchor dragging me down. I'm cutting you loose. If you have any dignity left, pack your things tonight. By morning, I don't want any trace of you here." Imani slowly rose to her feet, her body shaking, her heart shattering. She walked to the closet and began pulling out a suitcase, her hands trembling so badly she could barely grip the zipper. Every piece of clothing she folded carried a memory. Anniversary dinners, charity galas, quiet Sunday mornings. But now those memories felt like cruel jokes. As she packed, Hunter stood watching, arms crossed, face expressionless. Not once did he move to comfort her. Not once did his resolve waver. Imani finally closed her suitcase, tears streaming down her face. She turned to him one last time, her voice breaking but carrying a strange strength. "Hunter, you will regret this. One day you will realize what you've lost. One day you will understand the cost of your pride."
But Hunter said nothing. He simply turned his back, as if she had already ceased to exist. With slow, deliberate steps, Imani rolled her suitcase out of the bedroom, the wheels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. The penthouse that once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a tomb. She passed by family photos that would soon be removed, decorations she had carefully chosen, spaces she had tried to fill with warmth. She reached the front door and paused, looking back at the gleaming apartment she had called home for 5 years. Then she whispered to herself, "I may be leaving with nothing but my dignity, but I will not stay broken. God sees everything. My story isn't over." And with that, Imani stepped into the elevator, her suitcase beside her, tears falling freely, but somewhere deep inside, a spark of resilience beginning to glow, a promise to herself that this was not her ending, but her awakening. Imani didn't know exactly where she was going that night. She just knew she couldn't stay. She held her phone in one hand and her suitcase handle in the other, standing on the sidewalk as the December wind cut through her coat. The city lights blurred through her tears. She could still hear Hunter's voice echoing in her mind. "You're dead weight. You're holding back my future." She walked past glowing holiday displays, past couples holding hands, past families taking pictures in front of decorated storefronts. No one looked at her twice. No one knew that the woman in the elegant coat had just lost her marriage, her home, and her sense of self in a single night. Her closest friend, Tasha, lived in Brooklyn, about a 40-minute train ride away. They had met in college and maintained their friendship despite Imani's demanding schedule as Hunter's wife. If there was anyone who would open her door without questions, it was Tasha. Imani called an Uber with shaking fingers and sent a brief text. "Tasha, are you home? I need you. Please." By the time she arrived at Tasha's brownstone, it was nearly 10:30 p.m. The porch light was on. Before Imani could knock, the door swung open. Tasha stood there in her pajamas, eyes wide with alarm. "Imani, oh my God, what happened? Why are you crying? Is someone hurt?" Imani couldn't speak. She just collapsed into her friend's arms and let everything pour out. The years of silent shame, the medical appointments, the cold rejection, and finally, the divorce papers that would arrive tomorrow morning. Tasha held her tight and whispered, "Come inside. You're safe now." The divorce proceedings began exactly 1 week after that terrible night. Imani sat in the cold conference room of Hunter's attorney's office, feeling smaller with each passing minute. The mahogany table stretched endlessly between them, polished so perfectly she could see her own broken reflection staring back at her. Hunter arrived 20 minutes late, his attorney Richard trailing behind him with a thick folder of documents. He didn't look at Imani, not once. He sat across from her as if she were a stranger, as if 5 years of marriage had evaporated the moment he decided they had. Richard cleared his throat and began reading from the papers. "Mr. Grayson is offering a one-time settlement of $200,000 in exchange for Mrs. Grayson's signature on these dissolution documents. All property, including the penthouse, the vacation home in the Hamptons, and the joint investment accounts, will remain with Mr. Grayson, as they were acquired through his income." Imani's lawyer, a kind older woman named Helen who was working pro bono through a women's advocacy group, frowned. "That's barely enough to cover rent for 2 years in this city. Mrs. Grayson gave up her career to support her husband's rise. She deserves more." Hunter finally spoke, his voice flat and businesslike. "She deserves what I'm willing to give her. She contributed nothing to my success. If anything, she hindered it." Imani felt the words like a slap. She looked up at him, searching for any trace of the man she'd fallen in love with 7 years ago, the man who'd promised her the world. But his eyes were ice. "Hunter, I supported you through everything," she said quietly. "I was there when you worked 18-hour days. I hosted your clients. I stood beside you at every—" "And what do I have to show for it?" Hunter interrupted, leaning forward. "An empty nursery, a legacy that ends with me. Do you know what my father said when I told him about the divorce? He said, 'Finally, you're thinking like a Grayson. Cut the dead branches before they rot the whole tree.'" Richard shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Helen reached over and squeezed Imani's hand under the table. Hunter continued, his voice growing colder. "You had one job as my wife, Imani, one purpose, and you failed. Every month, every year, watching you fail again and again. Do you understand how embarrassing that was for me? How do I explain to my business partners why I'm still childless at 33? How do I sit in board meetings knowing they're all wondering if something's wrong with me?" "So you're blaming me to protect yourself?" Imani said, her voice trembling but steady. "You're destroying me to save your ego." Hunter stood abruptly, buttoning his suit jacket. "Sign the papers, Imani. Take the money, move on with whatever life you can manage. I already have." He glanced at Richard. "I assume we can finalize this by Friday?" Richard nodded. "If Mrs. Grayson signs today, yes." Hunter walked toward the door, then paused. Without turning around, he said, "You know what the saddest part is? I actually thought you might be enough once.
I was wrong. You were never going to be enough." The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded deafening in the silence he left behind. Imani sat frozen, staring at the documents in front of her. Helen's voice seemed to come from far away. "Imani, you don't have to sign today. We can fight for more. We can—" But Imani picked up the pen. Her hand shook as she signed her name on every line marked with a yellow tab. She just wanted it over. She wanted to stop feeling like she was suffocating. When the last signature was done, she stood up, gathered her coat, and walked out of that building knowing she would never see Hunter Grayson again. Or so she thought.
3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Imani sat in a cramped studio apartment in Queens, staring at a stack of medical bills from years of fertility treatments. She had been living with Tasha, but her friend had convinced her to take this small place, to start rebuilding, even in the smallest ways. The apartment was nothing like the penthouse. The walls were thin, the radiator clanked at night, and the view was of a brick wall across the alley. But it was hers, and in the quiet moments, when she wasn't drowning in grief, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, the faint whisper of freedom. Tasha knocked on her door one Saturday morning, holding 2 cups of coffee and a determined expression. "Get dressed. We have an appointment." Imani looked up from her laptop where she'd been searching for jobs. "What appointment?" "With Dr. Okonkwo. She's a reproductive endocrinologist at Mount Sinai. I told her about your situation, and she agreed to see you pro bono for a consultation." Imani shook her head. "Tasha, I can't go through that again. I've been poked and prodded for 5 years. Every test, every scan, every humiliating procedure. I know what the results say." "Do you?" Tasha set the coffee down and sat beside her. "Or do you just know what Hunter's doctors told you? Imani, you've been carrying this shame like it's yours to bear. But what if it isn't? What if you never got the full truth?" Imani wanted to argue, but something in Tasha's words struck a chord. Hunter had always controlled everything, which doctors they saw, which treatments they tried. He'd never let her see a specialist alone. He was always there, hovering, asking questions that made the doctors focus on her age, her stress levels, her diet. 2 hours later, Imani found herself in Dr. Okonkwo's office, a warm space filled with natural light and art from various African countries. The doctor was a tall woman with kind eyes and an accent that reminded Imani of her grandmother. "Ms. Grayson, or should I say Ms. Williams now?" Dr. Okonkwo smiled gently. "Tasha told me a bit about your situation. I'd like to run a comprehensive panel if you're willing. Not the standard tests, I mean a full reproductive health assessment." Imani nodded numbly and went through another round of blood draws, ultrasounds, and examinations. She felt like a ghost moving through familiar motions, expecting the same devastating results she'd heard for years. 1 week later, Dr. Okonkwo called her back to the office. Imani sat in the same chair, gripping the armrests, bracing herself for confirmation of her brokenness. Dr. Okonkwo opened her file and looked at Imani with an expression that seemed almost angry. "Ms. Williams, I need you to listen to me carefully. Your reproductive system is functioning perfectly. Your hormone levels are excellent. Your ovarian reserve is that of a woman 5 years younger. Your fallopian tubes are clear. There is absolutely nothing wrong with your fertility." The words didn't make sense at first. Imani blinked, trying to process them. That's impossible. I've been trying for 5 years. Multiple doctors said—" "What did they say exactly?" Dr. Okonkwo leaned forward. "Did they say you were infertile, or did they say you hadn't conceived yet?" Imani's mind raced back through years of appointments, trying to remember the exact words. The doctors had always been vague, mentioning unexplained infertility, recommending stress reduction, suggesting it might just take time. But Hunter had always translated it differently. "You're broken. You can't give me children. You're failing us." "Did your husband ever get tested?" Dr. Okonkwo asked quietly. The yang hung in the air like a bomb. Imani's breath caught in her throat. He
He said he did. He said everything was fine with him. Dr. Okonkwo's expression softened with something like pity. Ms. Williams, in cases of unexplained infertility in couples, the male factor accounts for 40 to 50% of cases. And yet, it's almost always the woman who bears the blame, the shame, and the stigma. Imani felt the room tilt. 5 years. 5 years of believing she was defective. 5 years of Hunter's accusations, his family's judgment, his mother's disappointed sighs. 5 years of feeling like less than a woman, and it was all a lie. "So I could have children?" Imani whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I could be a mother?" Dr. Okonkwo reached across the desk and took her hand. "My dear, you were always capable of being a mother. The only thing standing in your way was standing right beside you." Imani left that office with her test results clutched in her hand and a truth that changed everything. She wasn't broken. She had never been broken, and Hunter Grayson had destroyed their marriage to hide his own shame.
For 6 months after Dr. Okonkwo's revelation, Imani threw herself into rebuilding her life. She took a job as a marketing consultant for small businesses, using skills she'd buried during her marriage. The work was fulfilling, and slowly her bank account grew. She moved into a better apartment in Brooklyn, joined a book club, and started therapy to untangle the knot of shame Hunter had tied around her heart. But dating felt impossible. The thought of letting another man close enough to hurt her made her stomach twist. Tasha tried to set her up twice, and both times Imani canceled at the last minute, making excuses about work deadlines or headaches. "You can't let him win," Tasha said one evening over wine. "You can't let Hunter steal your chance at love because he was too much of a coward to face his own truth." Imani knew her friend was right, but knowing and doing were different countries separated by an ocean of fear. The change came unexpectedly on a rainy Tuesday in October. Imani was at a small business expo in Manhattan, representing one of her clients who owned a boutique catering company. She was setting up the display when someone bumped into her table, sending brochures scattering across the floor. "I'm so sorry," a deep voice said. "Let me help you with that." She looked up to see a tall man in a navy suit crouching down to gather the papers. He had warm brown eyes, close-cropped hair, and a smile that seemed genuinely apologetic. When he handed her the brochures, their fingers touched briefly. "Thank you," Imani said. "No harm done." He glanced at her display. "Monroe Catering. I've heard great things about them. I'm Marcus Ashford. I run Ashford Aviation. We do private charter services." He extended his hand. Imani shook it, feeling oddly steady. "Imani Williams. I handle their marketing." They talked for 20 minutes about business, about the challenges of building something meaningful in a competitive city, about the satisfaction of work that mattered. He didn't ask about her personal life, didn't probe for information she wasn't ready to share. He just listened when she spoke and made her laugh with stories about learning to fly helicopters as a teenager. Before he left, he handed her his card. "If your client ever needs aviation services for an event, give me a call. Or," he hesitated, something vulnerable flickering across his face, "if you'd like to grab coffee sometime, call me for that too." Imani held the card for 3 days before she texted him. They met at a small cafe in the West Village, and this time the conversation stretched for 2 hours. Marcus told her about building his company from a single helicopter to a fleet of 15 aircraft. He spoke about his late mother, who'd raised him alone, and taught him to value character over status. "What about you?" he asked gently. "What's your story, Imani Williams?" She took a breath, expecting the familiar panic, but instead she felt something like courage. "I'm recently divorced. It was difficult. I'm still putting the pieces back together." Marcus nodded slowly. "My ex-fiancée left me 3 years ago, said I cared more about my business than building a family with her. Maybe she was right. Maybe I wasn't ready then." He looked at Imani steadily. "But I think we get more than one chance to build the life we want. Don't you?" Over the next 4 months, they saw each other twice a week, then 3 times, then almost daily. Marcus never rushed her.
He never asked why she tensed when conversations turned to children or family planning. He simply showed up, reliable, honest, present. He brought her soup when she was sick. He listened to her talk about her clients' dreams. He made her feel seen in ways she'd forgotten were possible. One snowy evening in February, as they walked through Central Park, Marcus stopped under a lamppost and turned to face her. "Imani, I need to tell you something. I'm falling in love with you. Not the idea of you, not what you might give me someday, just you, exactly as you are right now." Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were different. They were tears of relief, of recognition, of coming home to herself. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. He pulled her close, and for the first time since her marriage ended, Imani believed that her story wasn't defined by what she'd lost. It was being written by what she'd found, herself, her strength, and a man who loved her not for what she could produce, but for who she had always been. 3 months later, Marcus proposed on the helipad of his company's headquarters, with the city glittering below them. And when Imani said yes, she knew she was choosing a future built on truth, not shame.
Imani discovered she was pregnant on a humid morning in June, 4 months after her wedding to Marcus. She'd been feeling off for a week, exhausted, nauseous, emotional over things that normally wouldn't faze her. When she missed her period, her heart started racing with a feeling she couldn't name, hope mixed with terror. She took the test in the bathroom of their brownstone while Marcus was at work. 3 minutes felt like 3 hours. When the word pregnant appeared on the digital screen, Imani sank to the floor and sobbed. But these weren't tears of grief, they were tears of vindication, of healing, of proof that Dr. Okonkwo had been right all along. When Marcus came home that evening, she was waiting in the living room, the positive test wrapped in a small box with a bow. He opened it, stared at it, and then looked at her with tears streaming down his face. "We're going to be parents? We're going to be parents," she whispered. He crossed the room in 2 strides and held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," he kept saying. "Thank you." Imani pulled back to look at him. "For what?" "For trusting me, for letting me love you, for giving us this chance." At the first ultrasound, the technician went quiet, moving the wand across Imani's belly with increasing focus. Imani's heart seized with old fears. Something's wrong. It's happening again. But then the technician smiled. "Well, this is unexpected. Congratulations, you're having triplets." Imani gasped. Marcus stood frozen. "Triplets? As in 3 babies?" "3 healthy babies," the technician confirmed, pointing to the screen where 3 tiny heartbeats flickered in perfect rhythm. Imani couldn't speak. She just stared at the monitor, at the 3 miracles growing inside her, and felt something break open in her chest. All those years of Hunter's accusations, all that shame, and now this, not just 1 baby, but 3. Meanwhile, across the city, in a different kind of silence, Hunter Grayson sat in his penthouse with his new wife, Julia. She was 26, blonde, and exactly the kind of woman he'd always said he wanted. They'd married 8 months ago in a ceremony that made the society pages. But the nursery he'd had designed remained empty. Julia had stopped talking about baby names. The fertility clinic appointments had become a source of tension neither of them addressed directly. Julia would come home from the doctor with pamphlets about IVF, about donor options, about adoption. Hunter would toss them aside. "We just need to keep trying," he'd say, but his voice lacked conviction. Julia would watch him scroll through his phone, looking at competitors' family photos on social media, and she'd wonder what she'd signed up for. The man who'd promised her the world now barely touched her. Their marriage bed felt more like a clinical procedure than an act of love. One night, Julia found old photos in Hunter's study, pictures of him with a beautiful black woman at various events.
In every photo, the woman smiled, but her eyes held a sadness Julia recognized. She'd seen that same look in her own mirror lately. "Who is this?" Julia asked, holding up a photo. Hunter glanced at it. "My ex-wife. She couldn't have children." Julia set the photo down carefully. "Did you ever think maybe it wasn't just her?" Hunter's jaw tightened. "Watch yourself, Julia." But the question hung in the air between them, unanswered and damning. 6 months later, in a bright hospital room filled with flowers and joy, Imani gave birth to 3 healthy boys. They came into the world minutes apart: Caleb, Christian, and Carter. Marcus cut each umbilical cord with tears streaming down his face. When the nurses placed all 3 babies in Imani's arms, she looked down at their perfect faces and whispered, "You are not revenge. You are not proof. You are simply loved. You are mine." Marcus leaned in and kissed her forehead. "Ours," he corrected gently. That night, while Imani slept with her sons in the hospital nursery beside her, Hunter lay awake in his empty penthouse, scrolling through business contacts on his phone. He paused on Imani's old number, which he'd never deleted. His thumb hovered over the call button. Julia's voice came from the bedroom doorway. "Are you ever going to tell me the truth?" Hunter didn't answer. He just closed his phone and stared at the city lights, feeling the weight of everything he'd thrown away settling like concrete in his chest.
The medical report sat in Hunter's locked desk drawer for 3 weeks before Julia found it. She'd been looking for their insurance documents when she discovered the folder marked Confidential Male Fertility Panel. Her hands shook as she read the results dated from 2 months before Hunter had divorced Imani. Severely low sperm count, poor motility. The doctor's notes recommended immediate intervention and lifestyle changes. The prognosis for natural conception, highly unlikely without medical assistance. Julia heard the front door open. She quickly photographed the document with her phone and returned everything to the drawer. When Hunter walked into the study, she was sitting at his desk, her face composed, but her eyes hard. "You knew," she said quietly. "Before you divorced her, you knew it was you." Hunter's expression didn't change. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Hunter. I found the report. You let that woman believe she was broken. You destroyed her to hide your own shame." Julia's voice rose. "And you married me thinking what? That a younger wife would magically fix your problem?" Hunter's jaw clenched. "My medical situation is none of your concern. I'm your wife. We've been trying for almost a year, and you've let me think something was wrong with me." Julia stood, her hands trembling with rage. "Every doctor's appointment, every negative test, every time your mother called asking about grandchildren, you let me carry that weight alone." Hunter poured himself a drink, his back to her. "You're being dramatic." "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air. Hunter turned slowly, his expression cold. "No, you don't. You like this life too much. The penthouse, the cars, the status. You're not going anywhere." Julia stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time the man she'd married. "You're right about one thing. I did like the life, but I'm not willing to become what she was, a scapegoat for your ego." She walked out of the study, leaving Hunter alone with his whiskey and his secrets. But she didn't file for divorce. Not yet. Instead, a cold war settled over the penthouse, with Julia sleeping in the guest room and Hunter working longer hours to avoid coming home. It was during one of those long nights at the office that Hunter's assistant, Monica, casually mentioned something that made his blood freeze. "Did you hear about Imani Williams?"
Well, I guess she's Imani Ashford now. She married that aviation billionaire. My cousin works at Mount Sinai and said she delivered triplets 6 months ago. 3 boys. Can you imagine? Hunter's hand tightened around his pen until it snapped. What did you say? Monica, oblivious to the storm brewing in his eyes, continued. I know, right? She always seemed so sad when she'd come to company events with you, but I saw her photo in Manhattan Magazine last month at some charity gala. She looked absolutely radiant. After Monica left, Hunter pulled up his laptop and searched for Imani's name. The articles appeared one after another. Imani Ashford, entrepreneur and philanthropist. Photos of her at galas, at business conferences, at charity events, and in several recent photos, she stood beside a tall, distinguished man with 3 identical toddlers. The babies looked about 6 months old in the pictures. Hunter did the math. She'd gotten pregnant less than a year after their divorce. After 5 years of nothing with him, she'd conceived almost immediately with someone else. The rage that filled him was irrational and consuming. It wasn't about love. He'd never truly loved Imani. It was about being proven wrong, about the narrative he'd built crumbling. He'd told everyone she was infertile. He'd built his exit strategy on that lie. And now she stood in magazine photos with 3 children while he remained childless. His mother's voice echoed from their last phone call. Hunter, when will you give me grandchildren? Julia is young. What's taking so long? He'd made excuses about timing, about Julia's career, about waiting until they were ready. But his mother's doubt was clear. Hunter opened his email and began typing. The company Christmas party was 3 weeks away. It would be held on the rooftop terrace with the Helipad, a showcase of his success. Every executive, every board member, every business partner would be there. And Imani would be there too. He'd make sure of it. The invitation was simple, almost innocent. Hunter Grayson and Julia Grayson request the pleasure of your company at the annual Grayson Industries Christmas Gala. We hope you can join us to celebrate another year of growth and success. He added a personal note. Imani, it would mean a great deal to see you there. Let's show there are no hard feelings. After all, we've both moved on to better things. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. In his mind, he imagined her arriving in a taxi, dressed simply, the single woman, while he stood with Julia. He'd introduce her to his colleagues, let them see the contrast, let them see that he'd upgraded. He never imagined she might have her own plans.
The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered by courier to Imani's office. She was in the middle of a conference call when her assistant brought in the thick cream envelope embossed with the Grayson Industries logo. After the call ended, Imani stared at the envelope for a full minute before opening it. Her hands were steady now, so different from the trembling woman who'd signed divorce papers 3 years ago. When she read the invitation and saw Hunter's personal note, something cold and sharp settled in her chest. She drove home early that day, finding Marcus in the nursery reading to the boys. Caleb, Christian, and Carter were sprawled on the floor in their matching pajamas, their attention more on their toy trucks than their father's animated reading of Where the Wild Things Are. Marcus looked up and immediately saw something in her expression. What happened? Imani handed him the invitation without a word. He read it, his jaw tightening with each line. When he finished, he set it down carefully, as if it might explode. He's trying to humiliate you, Marcus said quietly. He wants you to show up alone so he can parade his new wife and his success in front of you. I know, Imani said. I sat down on the rocking chair, watching her sons play. 3 years ago, this invitation would have destroyed me. I would have cried myself to sleep and found an excuse not to go. Or worse, I would have gone and let him make me feel small again. Marcus knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "You don't have to go. You don't owe him anything." Imani looked at her husband, at the man who'd loved her back to life, and felt something fierce bloom in her chest. "You're right. I don't owe him anything, but I owe myself something. I owe myself the chance to walk into that room not as the broken woman he discarded, but as the woman I've become." A slow smile spread across Marcus's face. "What are you thinking?" "The party is on the rooftop terrace, right? The one with the helipad?" Marcus's smile widened. "You want to make an entrance. I want to arrive the way I live now, on my own terms, in my own power, with my family beside me." Imani stood, pacing the nursery with growing energy. "For 3 years I've been healing privately. I've been rebuilding quietly. But maybe it's time Hunter Grayson and everyone who pitied me sees exactly what I've built from the ashes of his cruelty." Marcus pulled out his phone. "I have a helicopter available that evening. We were supposed to use it for a corporate client, but I can reschedule. What time does the party start?" 8 o'clock. Then we'll arrive at 8:30, fashionably late." Marcus looked at the boys, who had now abandoned their trucks and were climbing on each other. "What about them?" Imani's eyes softened as she watched her sons. "They come with us. All of them. I want Hunter to see what real love builds. I want him to see the 3 beautiful lives that exist because I escaped his prison." Over the next 2 weeks, Imani and Marcus planned every detail. Imani found a stunning white floor-length gown that made her look like royalty. Marcus had custom tuxedos made for the boys, tiny suits with bow ties and suspenders that made them look like the most adorable groomsmen in the world. Tasha came over the week before the party, her eyes shining when she saw the preparations. "Girl, you're really doing this?" "I'm really doing this. Not for revenge, not to hurt him, but to close this chapter on my own terms, to show myself that I survived him." The night before the party, as Imani tucked the boys into their cribs, she whispered to each of them, "Tomorrow we're going somewhere special. Mommy needs to show some people that she's not afraid anymore." Marcus came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Are you sure about this?" Imani leaned back against him, feeling safe and certain. "I've never been more sure of anything. Hunter wanted me to see me broken. Instead, he's going to see me whole, and that's the best response I could ever give him." She pulled out her phone and typed a simple RSVP. "Hunter, thank you for the invitation. My husband and I, along with our 3 sons, would be delighted to attend. We look forward to celebrating your continued success. See you on the rooftop. Imani Ashford." She hit send and felt the last piece of her old self fall away. Tomorrow, Hunter Grayson would learn that the woman he'd tried to destroy had become someone he could never touch again. Tomorrow, she would fly. The Grayson Industries rooftop terrace glittered like a winter wonderland. White lights draped across every surface. Ice sculptures glowed under strategic lighting, and servers in crisp uniforms circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The entire New York skyline stretched out behind the party, a backdrop of power and wealth. Hunter stood near the bar, checking his Rolex for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. It was 8:45. Imani's RSVP had said she'd attend, but he half expected her to lose her nerve. Julia stood beside him in a silver dress, her smile practiced and cold. They hadn't spoken much in the car ride over, and they wouldn't speak much tonight either. They were performing a marriage for the benefit of the guests. "Did you really invite your ex-wife?" Julia asked quietly, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Why not? We're all adults here." Hunter's voice was casual, but his eyes kept drifting toward the elevator doors. "Besides, I thought it would be good to show there's no animosity." Julia's laugh was bitter. Right, no animosity, just calculated cruelty. Before Hunter could respond, Monica from his office approached with 2 other executives' wives. "Hunter, wonderful party. We heard Imani might be coming tonight." "She RSVP'd, yes," Hunter said, swirling his champagne. One of the women,
Patricia leaned in with barely concealed glee. I heard she remarried, some businessman, but still, it must be hard for her to see you with Julia, especially after everything. What everything? Julia's voice had an edge. Patricia blinked, realizing she'd stepped into dangerous territory. Oh, just that, the divorce was so sudden and then, well, never mind. But Monica, slightly tipsy, continued. Poor thing couldn't have children. That's why they split, wasn't it? Must be difficult coming to a party full of families when you're... She stopped, finally noticing Julia's expression. Hunter felt a familiar surge of vindication mixed with something darker. This was exactly what he'd wanted, for people to remember Imani as the failure, the broken one, while he stood with his young, beautiful new wife. I hope she's found peace, Hunter said with false magnanimity. Not every woman is meant for motherhood. But even as he said it, something twisted in his gut. He remembered the medical report in his drawer, the truth he'd buried. He pushed the thought away and raised his glass, to moving forward. The executives raised their glasses in return, and for a moment, Hunter felt in control again. Then the sound came. At first, it was just a distant thrum, barely noticeable over the party music, but it grew louder, a rhythmic beating that made the champagne flutes begin to vibrate on their trays. Conversations faltered, heads turned upward. The helicopter appeared over the building's edge, its searchlights cutting through the night sky. It was sleek and white, with Ashford Aviation written in elegant script along the side. The rotor wash sent cocktail napkins flying and made women clutch their dresses. Who authorized a landing? Hunter demanded, but his voice was lost in the growing roar. The guests rushed to the windows and railings, watching as the helicopter descended with practiced precision onto the private helipad. Hunter stood frozen, something cold spreading through his chest. The helicopter touched down, and the rotors began to slow. Through the window, he could see movement inside. Then the door opened. She stepped first, and the collective gasp from the crowd was audible even over the dying engine noise. Imani wore a white gown that caught the light like liquid diamonds, her hair swept up elegantly, her bearing that of absolute confidence. But she didn't walk toward the party yet. Instead, she turned back to the helicopter and extended her hands. One by one, 3 small figures emerged, dressed in matching tuxedos with tiny bow ties. The boys couldn't have been more than 18 months old, and they were identical, 3 perfect, beautiful children who clung to their mother's gown as they took in the sparkling party before them. A tall, distinguished man stepped out last, placing his hand protectively on Imani's waist. He looked at her with such open adoration that several women in the crowd sighed audibly. The family stood there for a moment, framed by the helicopter and the glittering skyline, looking like they'd stepped out of a dream. Then Imani lifted her chin, smiled, and began walking toward the party with her husband and children, every eye on the rooftop locked on her transformation. Hunter's champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the terrace floor, but he didn't notice. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the 3 little boys in tuxedos, from the woman he'd called broken, from the life she'd built in the ruins he'd left her. Patricia whispered to Monica, her voice carrying in the shocked silence, "I thought you said she couldn't have children." Hunter felt Julia's eyes burning in the side of his face, felt the weight of 100 stares, felt his carefully constructed narrative crumbling with every step Imani took toward him. The party had just begun, but Hunter already knew he'd lost.
Imani walked through the parted crowd like she was walking through water, each step deliberate and calm. The boys held her hands, their little legs working hard to keep up. Marcus walked beside her, one hand on Christian's shoulder, his presence both protective and proud. Hunter finally found his voice as they approached. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Imani, what a dramatic entrance. I didn't realize you were bringing your entire family." "You invited me," Imani said simply, her voice steady, "and they are my family. Hunter, this is my husband, Marcus Ashford. Marcus, this is Hunter Grayson.
Marcus extended his hand. Hunter hesitated, then shook it, his grip too tight, his ego demanding some small victory. Marcus's handshake remained firm and unbothered. "Beautiful children," Hunter said, his tone carefully neutral. He looked down at the triplets, who were now staring at the ice sculptures with wonder. "Adoption is such a wonderful thing. It takes a special person to open their home to children who need families." The words hung in the air like poison. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Julia's eyes widened slightly. Imani smiled, but it was the kind of smile that could cut glass. "They're not adopted, Hunter. I gave birth to them 18 months ago. Natural conception, no medical intervention needed at all, actually." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Turns out, I was never the problem." The color drained from Hunter's face. Patricia and Monica exchanged glances. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Wait, didn't he say she couldn't have children?" Hunter's voice rose, defensive and sharp. "That's impossible. We tried for 5 years. Every doctor said there was no clear diagnosis," Imani interrupted gently. "They never said I was infertile. You did. You needed someone to blame, and I was convenient." She looked around at the watching faces, her voice carrying across the rooftop. "After our divorce, I saw a specialist who confirmed what I'd suspected. My reproductive health was perfect, always had been." Julia took a step forward, her face pale. "Hunter, what is she talking about?" But Hunter was spiraling, his carefully constructed world collapsing in real time. "You're lying. You're making this up to embarrass me at my own party." "I have no reason to lie," Imani said calmly. She reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone, pulling up a photo. "Would you like to see my medical records from 3 years ago? Or perhaps the ultrasound photos showing 3 healthy babies? I'm happy to share them." Marcus placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Imani, you don't need to prove anything to him." She looked at her husband and nodded, putting the phone away. "You're right." She turned back to Hunter, and for a moment her expression softened with something like pity. "Hunter, I didn't come here to humiliate you. I came here to close a chapter of my life. For 5 years I believed your lies. I believed I was broken. I believed I was the reason our marriage failed. But the truth is, our marriage failed because you were too much of a coward to face reality." "Don't you dare," Hunter started, but Julia cut him off. "You knew," Julia said, her voice trembling with rage. "Before you divorced her, you knew it was you, didn't you? That's why you never wanted to see specialists together. That's why you controlled every doctor's appointment. That's why—" her voice broke. "That's why we haven't conceived either." The crowd's whispers grew louder. Hunter's board members were watching with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. His assistant, Monica, looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Hunter's father, who'd been standing near the bar, walked over slowly. "Is this true, son? Did you divorce your wife over a lie?" "Dad, I can explain." "Explain what?" the older Grayson said quietly, but his disappointment was palpable. "That you destroyed a woman's reputation to protect your own inadequacy?" Caleb tugged on Imani's gown. "Mama, cold." Imani looked down at her son, and her expression transformed into pure maternal warmth. "I know, baby. We're leaving soon." She looked back at Hunter one last time. "I forgive you, Hunter, not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry your poison anymore. I hope one day you find the courage to be honest with yourself and with Julia." She turned to Marcus. "Let's go home." Marcus nodded, scooping up Carter while Imani held Caleb in Christian's hands. As they walked back towards the helicopter, the crowd parted once more, but this time several people were clapping softly. A few women had tears in their eyes. Hunter stood frozen, watching them leave, feeling the weight of 100 judging stares. Julia turned to him, her voice ice cold.
Don't bother coming home tonight. My lawyer will contact you tomorrow." She walked away, leaving Hunter alone in the center of his own party, surrounded by guests who now saw him exactly as he was, a small, insecure man who'd tried to destroy a good woman to hide his own shame. The helicopter's rotors began spinning again, and Hunter watched as Imani's family lifted into the sky, disappearing into the night like a dream he'd thrown away. The party continued around him, but the whispers never stopped, and Hunter knew that this night would define him far more than any business success ever could. He'd wanted to humiliate his ex-wife. Instead, he exposed himself.
The helicopter ride home was peaceful. The boys had fallen asleep within minutes, their little heads resting against Marcus and Imani. The city lights sprawled beneath them like fallen stars, beautiful and distant. Marcus squeezed Imani's hand. "How do you feel?" Imani thought about it for a moment, watching the skyline recede behind them. "Free," she said finally. "For the first time in years, I feel completely free." They landed at the private airfield where Marcus kept his fleet, and a car service took them home to their brownstone in Brooklyn. The house was warm and lit with Christmas decorations. Their nanny, Mrs. Chen, had left hot cocoa on the stove and a plate of cookies on the counter. As they carried the sleeping boys upstairs, Imani paused in the nursery doorway, watching Marcus gently tuck each son into his crib. He kissed their foreheads, whispered good night, and adjusted their blankets with the practiced care of a devoted father. This was her life now. Not perfect, but real. Not glamorous every day, but filled with genuine love. Not defined by what she lacked, but overflowing with what she'd found. Later that night, as they sat on the couch with mugs of cocoa, Imani's phone buzzed. It was a text from Tasha. "OMG, Monica just called me. Said the party completely fell apart after you left. Julia left Hunter standing there alone. His dad hasn't spoken to him since. You're a legend." Imani showed the text to Marcus, who smiled. "No regrets?" "Not a single one," Imani said, setting her phone aside. "I didn't go there for revenge. I went there to prove to myself that I survived him, that I'm more than what he tried to make me believe I was." Marcus pulled her close. "You're extraordinary. You always were. He was just too blind to see it." Meanwhile, across the city, Hunter sat alone in his penthouse. Julia had meant what she said. She'd gone to her mother's apartment and texted him instructions not to contact her. His father had left the party early, too disgusted to stay. The remaining guests had scattered quickly, their whispers following Hunter like ghosts. The penthouse felt cavernous and cold. The Christmas tree Julia had insisted on decorating stood in the corner, its lights blinking mechanically. Gifts were piled beneath it, expensive and hollow. Hunter poured himself another scotch and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city that suddenly felt foreign. His phone buzzed with notifications, text messages from colleagues offering vague excuses about upcoming meetings they needed to reschedule, an email from a board member suggesting Hunter take some personal time, a voicemail from his mother that he couldn't bring himself to listen to. He thought about Imani's face when she'd said she forgave him. He'd expected anger, triumph, cruelty. Instead, she'd looked at him with something worse, pity. She'd moved so far beyond him that she didn't even need to hurt him back. Her happiness was punishment enough. Hunter pulled out his phone and scrolled back through old photos, finding one from their second anniversary. Imani was laughing at something he'd said, her eyes bright with genuine joy. He'd been happy then, too, before the pressure of expectations and legacy had twisted him into something unrecognizable. He could have had that life. He could have gotten tested earlier, faced the truth together, explored options as a team. Instead, he'd chosen his ego over his marriage, his pride over his wife, his image over reality. Now he had none of it. No wife, no children, no respect from his colleagues or his father. Just an empty penthouse and the ghost of the man he could have been. Christmas morning arrived, cold and gray. In Brooklyn, Imani awoke to the sound of 3 toddlers shrieking with delight as they discovered presents under the tree. Marcus was already downstairs making pancakes, Christmas music playing softly in the background. Caleb ran to her, waving a new toy truck. "Mama, look!" She scooped him up, breathing in his baby shampoo scent, feeling his warm weight in her arms. Christian and Carter chattering excitedly about Santa and cookies and their new toys. This was wealth. This was success. This was legacy. In Manhattan, Hunter sat alone at his dining table, surrounded by silence. The breakfast his housekeeper had prepared sat untouched. Outside his window, families walked to church, children played in the park, couples strolled hand in hand. He'd spent years building an empire, curating an image, chasing a version of success that required sacrificing the people who loved him. And in the end, he'd achieved exactly what he'd worked for, a glass castle, empty and cold, reflecting nothing but his own hollow reflection. His phone buzzed one final time, a message from Julia's lawyer about preliminary divorce proceedings. Hunter set down his coffee and walked to his study. In the locked drawer, beneath the medical reports he'd hidden for years, was a small velvet box. Inside was Imani's original engagement ring, the simple one he'd given her before the money and the success and the pressure had changed him. He held it up to the light, remembering the woman who'd said yes to him when he was nobody, the woman who loved him before he became Hunter Grayson CEO, the woman who deserved so much better than what he'd given her. "Merry Christmas, Imani," he whispered to the empty room. "I hope your boys know how lucky they are." But his words disappeared into the silence, unanswered and too late, leaving him exactly where he'd always feared he'd end up, alone with nothing but his pride to keep him company.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine, so do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. We love you!